Any second here. Give it just a second, everybody. Sorry for the. I always have to get this thing synced up. All right, I'm going to mute that.
Looks like we are in
Darren,
participant view, but we're live.
yay. Okay, cool. I'm going to get into the correct view so people can see people larger. All right. So we can get the party started. It's good to see everybody. I hope people are having a good start to the summer for I think most people are here in the Northern Hemisphere. Winter for those in the South. Rick, you got some announcements to kind of kick things off with?
Yeah, well, we've got the next office hours is going to be August 6th after we get back from the Glacier workshop. And we're going to talk a little bit about sort of culling, how to sort of work your way through millions of images and sort of get down to the ones that you want to keep, that sort of thing. We've had some questions about it, and Hudson and I are working on our Lightroom organizing class and an editing class course. And so that'd be a good time for us to be talking about that. So
Yeah, I think we'll also hit a little bit on making sure that you are presenting to the world just what really stands out. A good representation of what you do, and not sort of everything that you've done. That tends to be a difficult thing to move through.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I'm going to see Hudson next week, and one of the things that I've been finishing up is my portfolio. And I'm bringing it to sort of walk Hudson through the images that I've got and have him be ruthlessly critical as to which ones stay and which ones go. So, but it's an important process, and it's been a good process for me to do it. So, anyway, all right. I don't have any other announcements. I mean, we'll talk about workshops in a little bit. And, we had the Z6 III announcement yesterday, which got some people really excited on their interwebs. One of the interesting questions that seems to be hanging out there is Z7 III. Where the heck is that? And you had some interesting thoughts about that, because the price difference between the Z6 III and the Z8 is basically $1,000.
Yeah.
It's like, where does a Z7 III, if they announce it, where does that fit in?
It's interesting. I mean, from being this oh my gosh, Nikon's gonna die, I should pick what camera brand I'm gonna move to. They've moved into this realm where they have so many overlapping options for optics and camera bodies. The one thing that they don't have is a really high megapixel sensor. Rick's working with 60 megapixels with his A7R5, and I'm working with 60 megapixels with the Q3. And I would have at one point thought, well, that doesn't make that much difference. But, it is wonderful in the landscape to get the kind of quality that would have taken me 12 panoramic merged images in 3 panoramic merged images. It is really, really nice. It makes me think about the world differently, and the croppability is just incredible. And I'm sure that they know that they need that, and they also need to be addressing the lower end of the spectrum. I mean, they're still selling those lower end DSLRs to the masses in Costco's and Walmarts. And I think, they need, and the Z50, but they need to come up with something beyond the Z50 in the APS-C space, which is being filled presently with lots of quality third-party lens options, alongside some really cool Nikon APS-C lens options. So there's a lot that they need to do. I think the Z6 III will come.
Z7 III.
Or the Z7 III. I think it will probably cost as much or even a little bit more as a Z8 and have really high megapixels and image quality. That's my prediction, but I don't have a crystal ball. They just started talking to me, so I'm at the bottom of their totem pole.
Yeah. Well, Tom Hogan's been talking a lot about, sort of all of this. If you're interested in sort of Tom's takes on things, he seems to think that a Z7 III is going to happen. And I agree with you. I mean, the next stage is 60 megapixels or even 70, which is one of the rumors that 72 is the next step we're going. And as someone who's shot from 24 to 60 megapixels, you know, there's times when I don't need 60 megapixels, but when I'm out there in the landscape, that is exactly what I want. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would use I'll bet. I mean, I don't have it yet, but I have been very, very happy with the ZF in low lit situations because of its sensor. You know, it lets you handhold in situations that would not be possible with the Z8 and the Z9. And
yeah,
this new camera really has its sensor is as good in low light as they're saying. It could be really cool having the Z6 III for night photography, even on the tripod. I might choose it over the other cameras if it's, you know, what we're going to find out. It's interesting. There's these weird, I don't know if there's any truth to it, but there's rumors that it got a sensor that was fabbed by Sony's sensor fab division intentionally for the next A7S model, the A7S4. But then, you know, deals were made years ago and maybe Sony got to where that got delayed and the Nikon's being announced first with that sensor. But that's always been their low light insanity camera. They've kept it at 12 megapixels till now. So yeah, I'm hopeful it'll be interesting. So
okay. Anything else you got? I mean, I think we did the Adobe terms of service to death. Anybody out there? It's your cat wants to know, Elizabeth, but I thought it was interesting.
I mean,
what? Go on.
We just in all of the convenience that big technology brings us, we give away a certain amount of our own privacy for that convenience. And I don't think that Adobe's utilizing, even if you have creative cloud version of Lightroom and you're putting all your best stuff up in the cloud to be able to edit and organize it. I mean, I just can't imagine that they're going through and combing through everybody's stuff in a nefarious way. They probably are doing things behind the scenes to try to improve your user experience. Now, whether you trust them into the future is another question.
Yeah.
Personally, I like Lightroom Classic better anyway, and my stuff's not up in their cloud except as I move it from my phone into Lightroom Classic. So
yeah. Well, and it was interesting that the Department of Justice is suing Adobe over the way the things you have to go through to cancel a subscription, and I think that's something Adobe's been at fault for years. DOJ took on Amazon over the same thing. They are actually very similar in the ways that they work. So.
And I will complain, you know, I love I'm a Google Pixel guy and I love that ecosystem, but I've had a horrible time trying to eliminate large files to get them off my back for adding more cloud storage fees to my account. And it's just, it should be easier than it is. It should be very easy for me to download that into my NAS and have it at my fingertips through my own cloud storage and get it off the Google server and not have them constantly saying, well, you're up to 90% with your email and your Google Photos. And it's just, all these things are a little bit annoying. And it does feel as if all of these companies recognize the potential of giving us these toys and these really cool tools that tend to lead us to store tons and tons and tons of data in the cloud and then charge us for that storage space. I mean, I think it's a pretty good plan they have, but they have plenty of money as it is. So
yeah, everybody wants.
You know, well, go ahead, Rick.
No, I said they're all after your money. I mean, you know, the number of companies that are not doing software companies that are not doing subscription services is pretty small. You know, I mean, it's. And in some ways I understand it. In other ways, I'm like, yeah, you need to just make better products. You know, that's what will get your audience to grow. So, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because we did have that question. I think it was from Dave about the NAS and whether we're still happy with our Synology NAS system. And I'm more than happy with the Synology NAS system. I haven't been using Dropbox at all. Rick and I share a folder on my big box through Synology Drive the same way you would share a folder through Dropbox with someone. And I'm constantly, I'll shoot videos for B-roll for my approaching the scene videos on my phone, and then just share it to the Synology Drive app, and whoop, throws it into a folder on my drive, and all my computers are connected in via 10G, and I can throw it into the video. It works great, and all my videos and photos are, and it's infinitely expandable. I'm more than happy with it. And I think that some of these things that we're talking about with the problems with people storing your data up in the cloud, with a little time and effort, can be solved by a good NAS system in your home.
Yeah. I love mine as well. And I mean, it's, the issues for me are still, I don't know that I actually needed a NAS, that I could get by with a good RAID system.
Yeah.
But I love it. And, we've moved from sort of a couple of half-assed ways to sharing workshop images with people to an app that runs on the Synology. So it's like it's drop dead easy for me to create an album for a workshop, and so people can upload candid photos from the workshop and that sort of stuff. And that's been great.
Yep.
So
without it filling my Google Drive space and causing Google to ask me to pay for more storage.
right.
Yeah. It all
All
kind
right.
of comes circling back.
Well, we've got a bunch of questions left over from last time and a bunch of good questions this time. So let me just, I know we talked about going to do the 2025 workshop schedule. I'm just getting my stuff together here. All right, so I'm going to share a screen.
There we go. I see it.
Can you see it? All right. Can you see it now? Yes?
I do.
Oh. Okay.
Sorry.
All right.
That's fine.
So we've actually been trying, the last couple of years, we've been trying to sort of get our schedules such that we're announcing workshops earlier in the year for the following year. And so we've got this next year's schedule down. We have definite dates for some, and we're still working on others. There's logistical things that we need to do. But we're going to do one printing workshop in February next year. We're going to go back to Death Valley, the 24th to 28th. Death Valley is, it's in my top 3 workshops that we do. It's just such an amazing place to shoot. And then the week after that, we're going to do Joshua Tree. Both Death Valley and Joshua Tree will have Milky Way components. They are not Milky Way workshops. That's not the only thing we're going to do. But there will be opportunities for Milky Way in both those workshops. We're going to do Costa Rica again. The waiting list for that has been huge. And after the last workshop and some of the YouTube videos that you guys posted, Hudson, that there's a big demand for it still. So we will be doing the same area. We're still going to work out of Botanica for this workshop. I'll talk a little bit more about other stuff later. Those dates are pretty solid, but they could still shift a bit. Then at the back end of the year, we've got Rainier National Park, which is one that Hudson did years ago, and we've been dying to get back to. That will be sometime in August. I don't even have a close estimate now. Stacy's still sort of working through, places so we can stay and stuff like that. So we're going to do Brookings on the Oregon.
Spectacular. It's really a spectacular location for a photo workshop. It's got everything in close proximity, from the mountains to lakes to reflections to old growth forest, marmots, deer. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah. And then the Oregon coast, we're going to do Brookings next year, which we did in 2021. That was our first post-COVID workshop. And it's a wonderful location down in the southern part of the coast. That will probably be early September, and there will most likely be a Milky Way component to that one as well. but don't hold me to it until we actually post dates. And then we've got Scotland. We're doing Scotland mid-October this year. We'll do Scotland again mid-October next year. So that's kind of the basic 2025 rollout. Printing Death Valley Joshua Tree in Costa Rica will open sometime next month. We've actually got, because we've got the dates for the first three, I'm pretty far along on the descriptions for those, but we need to verify Costa Rica. And, every year we go back, there's price changes and things like that. So we don't want to post it until, we don't want to post the other three until we have Costa Rica ready as well. Rainier, Oregon Coast, and Scotland will probably open in August, September. Again, Scotland might be a little bit later than that, just because, again, it's a pretty large logistical hurdle that we've got to work through there. And then depending upon demand, we might run 2 consecutive workshops in either Costa Rica or Scotland. It's going to depend on the demand. We're equipped to do either. We won't do 2 Scotland and 2 Costa Rica though. So I imagine that Costa Rica will get a sense when we post that, how many people are going to be there, and whether we open that or not. And if we open Costa Rica, there won't be a second Scotland workshop.
Right.
And then we will do another printing workshop in 2025, and that will sort of depend on, timing and things like that. We're looking at June and possibly July. They're very easy for us to get set up and post. So if the February printing workshop sells out, and you still want to do printing, I'm going to show you in a minute just sort of how you can sort of get yourself on the waiting list for these different workshops. So, and then, we don't normally talk about where we're going beyond the next year, but, there's a bunch of stuff going on, and we've got a lot of people always asking. This fall, David, Hudson, and I are going to be scouting the Dolomites for a workshop in 2026. We're also in 2026 and 27. We've heard, people want Palouse, they want Charleston, they want Moab. We've got Yellowstone and Tetons, and we're talking about Cuba again as well. It will depend on how the situation is in Cuba, but we know that it's someplace that we like to go and we want to go, and we know that there's lots of people. We're talking about Pantanal, Katmai. We're also looking at different destinations in Costa Rica. It's such an amazingly diverse place, and there's many places we can go. And Dennis, who many of you have been with on the Costa Rica workshops, Dennis, we're working on trying to get a better working relationship with Dennis, so that we can do some more stuff with him as well. So, and then we're already working on total eclipse workshops in 2026 and 2027. We've got someone scouting Spain for us this fall. So that's kind of sort of the short term and the near term. None of the stuff other than Dolomites you can count on right now, though, and the eclipse workshops. So, so how do you get on the list? So if you want to be notified when a workshop is posted, what you need to do is sort of sign up for the workshops that you're interested in. And if you go to hudsonhenry.com 2025 list, which is in the menu now at hudsonhenry.com, there's a form that has both 2025 workshops and the 26 and beyond stuff that I just talked about. Check the ones that you'd like to be notified about. I'll give you my standard spiel about don't check every box. Really check the places that you would like to go with us. And then the way it'll work is we will email people in advance of when the workshop opens in the store. So if you sign up for Death Valley, for instance, when we're ready to post it, you'll receive an email a few days in advance telling you when the workshop is going to open. And we do our best. We can't guarantee spots. There's some workshops where alumni get first crack at things, like Scotland this year was one of those. We do our best. I've said to people before that in general, our workshop demographic is really, or makeup is really, we get about 40% of the people in a year who have been on workshops with us before. And then the rest are new people. So new people do get on. And, you know, I don't see any workshops next year that are going to be totally sold out by alumni, though. Most of these places we've been to before. We do have a healthy alumni waiting list for Scotland, but we also, you know, don't expect that everybody will sign up for those. So, and then this is that page that I was talking about. You know, it's just sort of a put your name in there, your email, and I'll say this email list. If you put your name in on this, you are only being added to my waiting list. This does not, you know, if you subscribe to HudsonHenry.com emails, like you get the ATS emails, or you've unsubscribed, they're not part of this. I send out the emails, the workshop emails, just from my HudsonHenry.com account. So if you want to be notified, make sure that you put the correct email address in. It amazes me how many people, you know, I get a bounce on for a bunch of emails. So I think that's it. I don't know if there's any questions. There we go.
Rob was asking where the Pantanal is, but Ken Hauser, who it's good to see in the room, let him know it's in Brazil. It's wetlands, it's wildlife, spectacular wildlife location.
Yeah, and that's a place that Dennis has gone, and we're talking about, you know, going and doing a scout as well.
Yeah, teaming up with Dennis. Dennis is a wonderful resource, a great instructor, a great guide, and a great person. I love working with him.
So
all right.
Doesn't look like there's any questions specifically about workshops. You see anything, Darren? Any questions over there? Nope. All right.
Darren's a little delayed on a remote location. All right. Let's get some questions.
Jump into questions. All right. Let's see here. All right. Daniel says he's traveling to Africa with a Z8 and a 28 and 120 and a 180 to 600 and was looking for a second camera to serve as a backup and to use the second lens. He'd also like to know if there's any other lenses he should consider.
You know, I mean, he's got that focal range really covered. Maybe a wide angle, either a prime or, you know, since he's going with that lightweight kit, the 14 to 30 might complement that really nicely, depending, you know, not everybody loves to use ultra wides, but I think it's a nice thing to toss in. Africa has so many spectacular acacias and skies, you know, and if you get the opportunity to get out and do some sunset photography with some of those landscapes, getting a tree big in the scene with most of the sky at the same time. Skies are just magnificent out there. And that's where you want that ultra wide. Sometimes you want to have as much of that spectacular cloudscape as possible and some interesting foreground subject at the same time. So I would think that as far as a camera body to go alongside, you know, we've been having this discussion about what makes the most sense. And it's interesting to me, you know, that a lot of people choose to have two of the same camera. I always think it's nice to have two cameras that complement each other well. Back in the day, I used to love having the D850 and the D500 because the D500 was the APS-C gave me more reach with the same lenses and fast handling, and the 850 gave me the megapixels I wanted at that time for landscape and was a jack of all trades. And you know, you don't really like working as much with ultra wide angles with APS-C, and you don't really like working as much with long lenses with full frame sometimes. And a trip like that, those are the perfect complement. So, you know, given the lightweight kit you have, you might even want to consider like a Z50. You know, again, I really think it would be nice if they come out with a Z70 or something in that realm.
Yeah.
But the other option would be, you know, I don't know how fast they're going to get the Z6 III out, but a really high quality 24 megapixel low light machine. The other thing you're going to wind up, you know, potentially inside some, you know, bazaars or, you know, a village hut, smoky situations when you're maybe visiting a Maasai village or something like that. And having a low light hand holdable camera in some situations is just marvelous.
Yeah.
Or you're working in a low lit situation with wildlife, you know, you might not want those 45 megapixels that get noisy. You know, you'd rather have something where you can run up to right up to 20,000 ISO and have a really wonderful recoverable image. The 20 megapixels can be a great backup camera, so 24 megapixel cameras can. So I really think that's the reason for lower megapixel full frames is, you know, really great high ISO noise rendition. So
Yeah.
those are my
Okay.
thoughts.
All right. Brian asked, he says he's got a 6-year-old, 6+ year old iMac with an i9 chip. So that's pre-Apple Silicon.
Yep.
He thought it would be future-proof when he got it, but Lightroom Photoshop updates, and he's using the Fuji GFX 100S, which produces very large files, and he does a lot of panos. Now he's finding that edits take a long time. And he kind of says two things. With more AI coming, is this a reason to switch to the cloud versions? I'm assuming Lightroom and Photoshop. And then do I just need more updated hardware? And I will
you take it, Rick.
Yeah, I will tell you that I have a very old Intel-based Mac laptop, and it is just about at the point where, you know, trying to build panos and stuff like that is just, it's hard. You know, it's one of the reasons I upgraded to a Mac Studio with the M1 chip a couple of years ago, because I wanted that power. I think, you know, if I were going to do one thing to that to that setup, it's not going to cloud-based versions of Lightroom or Photoshop, because you're still going to be processing images on your computer. I would definitely go with a faster, more modern computer. You know, the AI stuff. I mean, in general, I don't know how much AI is really going to help with processing power. You know, if anything else, you know, if you notice, like Lightroom added AI, you know, basically the generative fill stuff to the remove tool in Lightroom, and it has to go up to the cloud and come back. It takes time to do that stuff.
It actually has to, I mean, your system has to sort of analyze the image, synthesize all that data, send it up to the cloud. Then Adobe takes it, takes a look at it, decides what might be good to put back, brings it back in. And then, I mean, your computer's doing a ton of processing in that whole maneuver. And you're still going to be assembling your panos, particularly if you're doing these, you know, big medium format image panos. I mean, you just need horsepower. And that's the reason why I chose the Studio Ultra, is just because nothing's upgradable with Mac, and I wanted it to last as long as possible and stick 128 gigabytes of RAM in there.
Yeah.
You know, and I know there's always the PC Mac thing. I mean, I will say that my 4 or 5 year old XPS Dell machine that sits back in the corner where you work. I mean, I've upgraded its RAM, I've upgraded its drives, I've upgraded its power supply, and it's still kicking and doing a pretty good job with video editing. You know? That's I wish things were more upgradable, but I think that if you're really going to be working with that kind of camera and those kind of files, what you buy right now, you should max it out.
Yeah.
Not necessarily with storage, because
what was that?
You know, a 10 gigabit Ethernet, well, not necessarily with storage as much, because I don't think you need to buy the hugest hard drive in the computer. You're going to be able to tie in via Thunderbolt and 10 gigabit Ethernet. But when it comes to RAM and processor, and having those Thunderbolt and Ethernet connections, that's where I think it's really worth it to invest.
I will say that the the M series Max studios, the ones with,
Mhm.
the highest end ones are really better for video processing and photo processing. You don't get that much more performance out, going to that second level, that higher level. I bought the M1 Pro, I guess it is, studio, largely because, I did some looking at yours, and for the amount of money I was going to pay, it was not going to give me that much more performance. I mean, it was like small iterations.
Well,
So
and that's a good distinction too, because I spend just as much time video editing as photo
right,
editing these days. So
right.
yeah.
No. Okay. Um, so Kathy asks about the lossy DNG format, the lossy raw format. I mean, most of the newer cameras have a uncompressed raw, lossless compressed raw, and a lossy raw format. Um, and the differences in size can be pretty big, especially with the lossy formats. Um, you have any thoughts on that, Hudson? I mean, the question is basically because you know you go out and you shoot somewhere and you come back with several hundred 50 to 60 megabyte images, and you know the rapid consumption of those cheap quotes storage resources.
I would prefer to cull and keep as high a quality raw file as possible. Yeah, I always, I mean, there's in the days when you could choose uncompressed, that's what I did. Now I choose the lossless compression. I know there's a lot of people that use the the quote, lossy compression that's supposed to give you the same image quality, but I don't know. I
I,
just want the raw data as close to what I shot as I possibly can. And I think it's important to cull, if you're going to keep 7,000 images from the day, well, I mean,
yeah,
maybe it's a good impetus to be culling down to what's actually important.
yeah, yeah. I actually, in the early years of the Sony, well, first off, they didn't have a lossless compression. All of their raw files had some lossy compression, and it was fine, and it especially helped with the R series, which had the higher megapixels. Um, and when Sony went to, they offered a lossless compression, and then a straight raw file. I went to the lossless, and about 6 months later, something happened, and I had to reset my camera, and it shot. It default was lossy compression, and I got back from a camping trip where I had taken these beautiful sort of blue hour shots with this gorgeous gradients in the sky,
I remember
and
this.
they all when you look edit them on screen, they look fine, and then when I went to print them, um, I noticed that there were just like, I mean, it looked like color blotches in the sky, and that
Posterization.
yeah, that was due to the compression format. And
Yeah.
it's like since then, that was 8, 9 years ago, and ever since then, it's like I do use the lossless compression. It saves you some
I
space,
I
but
recall you not being particularly happy about
I was not happy about that at all.
that.
Largely because for some, this was back in the day when they do firmware updates, and it would like reset your camera, and I think that it was like that wasn't one of the ones that I was thinking about for whatever reason. I probably did the firmware update right before I went on that trip, which is
Hmm.
never a good sign. Um, you know, make a note of that, Nikon fellows going to Glacier with us. If Nikon comes out with a firmware update on the day before the Glacier workshop, don't do it. So, but
No.
anyway, Carl
I'll
asked,
take one while you're looking. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, Carl asked if you've had a chance to play with the Viltrox 16 millimeter 1.8.
You read my mind. I was picking that up. I was going to say, I'll answer Carl's question about the Viltrox while you look. I have it in my hand. I have been crazy busy with a whole number of things lately. Viltrox sent this to me to test out, and it's funny because Viltrox is a company who has evolved so rapidly from producing lenses that I was like, no, I can't use this, to wow. Their 75 1.2 for APS-C is for APS-C, but its image rendering for that smaller sensor is so beautiful. The color and it reminds me of a little Plena, way cheaper. This 16 that they produced, I was van camping with the kids out in the Coast Range last weekend, and it was a clear sky night, no moon, but we didn't have the Milky Way up, and I was exhausted. I didn't get up at 2 a.m. to do Milky Way, but I did shoot stars on the new Nomad tracker from Move Shoot Move, which in my links is now updated. That is a much more solid, capable, easy to use version of the Move Shoot Move star tracker. And I stuck this 16 on, not having a huge bunch of expectations. It's pretty close to rivaling the Nikon 20 1.8 for having pinpoint stars and no chromatic aberration in the corners and being quite sharp wide open, and yet it's 16 millimeters. So yeah, I will be doing more with this. And I don't really have the images yet to want to launch a video about it, but I think that if anybody's excited about doing stars this summer, this guy is cheap, small, has a beautiful little screen readout too that's nicer than the Nikon lenses screen readouts on the 2.8 series that has those. And it's got function buttons and a manual autofocus button and a click for video shooters to have smooth aperture transitions, and it takes a 77 millimeter filter. It's a really nicely made, sharp performer, especially for night work. So the Viltrox 16 1.8. Maybe we'll throw a link in the discussion so that people can run over. It's a cool little lens. I will be praising it before too much time goes by, along with that new Nomad tracker from Move Shoot Move. It's a nice update. Nothing wrong with the original one, but this does fix the few issues I had with it. It's simpler to use. It's more rock solid and locked down. You can use a heavier setup on it, and it's smaller and easier to charge and just nicer.
Okay. Bill asked about the new Naivo bag. He said he ordered it and hadn't heard anything yet. Was wondering if you had any information about when we might see those new bags.
They have been scrambling to get all the Kickstarter backers, the pledges, their bags. Naivo's always been amazing about that, but they grew significantly, I think, in the course of the 50s campaign. And they got, what was it, like 6 or 8 times the amount of pledges that they were looking for on Kickstarter. So they've been scrambling with production to get all those bags put together. And that fabric is special that they use, that recycled fishing net with the DWR coating that's environmentally safe, the waterproof coating. So they, I believe, are finishing up getting the last of the Kickstarter people their bags. They haven't even listed it on their own site. Their priority is getting all the Kickstarter bags out. And they're talking about sending a shipment of those within this month towards Portland. So if you were a Kickstarter backer, you ought to have it soon if you don't already. And we ought to be getting them up on our site in weeks. So, and along with extra large RCIs and extra small RCIs. I haven't even talked about the extra small RCI. It's a really neat little product that can augment a medium and make it sort of like a large. You can stack them together in the bag and you can pull it out and use it like a hip bag, like a Domkey. It's pretty cool. They keep innovating. So.
Okay. Rich Horn has a question, or I don't know if it's a question or comment, but you flagged it, so I'm assuming you want to talk about it. Are you aware that enabling silent mode on the Z89 also disables stabilization? According to his NPS
his
rep,
Nikon rep. Yeah,
Nikon rep,
not right. No, I looked into that. It's not correct. It does disable long exposure noise reduction. It does not disable image stabilization. I just thought I'd flag that so that we could let him know the rep gave him incorrect information.
What? I can't believe
That's
that.
not uncommon.
All right, let's see. Tony, I'm going to give Tony's question. Um, he talks about, he's a Sony shooter, but he talks about the case filters and step up rings and stuff like that. And he says, I'm using 77 millimeter step up rings on my Sony lenses for use with the 82 case filters. Still get hung up on not having the lens hood fitted while shooting, and putting them back in the cabinet seems a waste of time to remove the step up rings so that the hood can be refitted. He tried one of the inlaid rings as an experiment, but they don't appear to have the same strength to hold the filters. Any advice on how to streamline the workflow and perhaps offer your own views on when to use a lens hood?
So I will just say, I think in times gone by, we had a lot of lenses that behaved very poorly in backlight, especially like oblique backlight. You'd have the sun in the frame, and all of a sudden you'd have flare. Half the frame would look sort of like it had, you know, an orange haze to it and ghosts floating everywhere. And for those of us using modern technology and modern lenses, even the aftermarket lenses or have these just amazing coatings and lens designs that, I mean, we're shooting sun stars constantly and pointing it right into the sun, doing panoramas with the sun in the frame with very marginal ghosting, those little specks that pop up that are easily change. You can now get rid of those if the remove tool in Photoshop or the perfect eraser doesn't work. You know, Photoshop's AI replacement will do a great job. It's I really view hoods in the natural landscape as more of a lens protector. You know, I keep it on my 51.0, partly because it's nice the way my hand fits around it. And it also is protecting that big front element. I keep it on my 400 or my 100 to 400 or my 400 back there, mainly because you're working with a big long lens and you don't want to bump into things with it. I don't think, ever used the hood that came with my 24 to 120. I don't think I've ever used it. I have a MC UV from Case on the front of it. I take that off when I'm going to deploy a filter. And I take it off if I'm not going to use a filter and it's a spectacular landscape, because this is like a second lens cap that's catching dirt and sunscreen and fingerprints and things. And I'd rather be cleaning it all the time. But when it's a truly special shot, or I'm going to shoot that Sunstar, I take this cheaper piece of glass off and let the front element that's perfectly clean underneath do the work. When I put a filter on in front of it, now I have a new thing protecting it. I don't really worry about using hoods and filters at the same time, because the minute I put a filter on, I have something protecting my front element. You know, I'd rather trash a $200 circular polarizer. I think in studio situations where you've got really intense lights coming in obliquely, sometimes a hood is important. And that's why you'll see Hollywood studios use matte boxes, big customizable, you know, boxes that block any light outside the subject. I have, because so many people are concerned about it and so many people love to use their hoods. I actually had the pleasure of meeting up with Case's CEO. He's on his first US trip and was here in Portland, and we had a nice dinner. And he promised to work on a little project for me that would be sort of like the HB97 hood for the 14 to 24, and all the 2.8 zooms that Nikon does, where they just snap to the lens body, and then the filters can magnetically click into those, the 112 millimeter filters, except creating one that could adapt down and thread onto just about any size lens, and could adapt to mount 95s or 112 millimeter filters, or even maybe 82 millimeter filters. So you could adapt it on both ends to work with magnetic filters with any lens, but it would be threaded in. Case makes a magnetic hood, and I don't like it, because now you're adding another layer of magnetism and reducing the magnetism of the filters, and you bump into it, it could fall, and the filters could fall, and you wind up breaking a lot of expensive glass. I'd rather have it thread or snap onto the lens body. But I mean, yeah, there's no way to use the 77 millimeter hood on this 100 to 400 and then an 82 millimeter or 112 millimeter filter on the outside of it. It just doesn't fit.
Yeah.
But again, in my mind, the minute that I take this hood off and put a filter out in front of it, it's the front element's protected. And I haven't had much problem with ghosting and flare with the modern lenses, for the mirrorless lenses in particular. So, Rick, I
Yeah.
mean, do you?
The only time I ever use a hood is when the weather is not so great, in which case I'm generally not using a filter.
Yeah.
I might have a screw in, but that's it. And when I'm shooting into the sun, when it, I will, especially with a wide angle lens, but I also will work to try and get as much flare out of the frame as I can, unless that's part of the effect I'm looking for.
I remember. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I still, when I travel, like when I go to Glacier, I'm going to have lens hoods on all my lenses, just because I want to protect them, and it's not a big deal to me. One of the reasons I love that big 60 pack is when I'm out there in the field shooting, I can toss all those lens hoods into that top compartment. If I need them, they're there. But otherwise, once I'm out in the field, I'm ready to shoot. So,
I remember being at a Q&A with Art Wolf 15 years ago, and someone asked him, there were all these images and stuff of him working with wide angles without hoods. And they're like, how come you're not using a hood? And he's like, if my lens is less than 200 millimeters, the first thing I do with the hood when I take it out of the box is throw it in a drawer. And that drawer has hundreds of them in it. And I never look in it again. So your mileage may vary, but I think it's more of a protection against damage than an optical instrument. So
yeah, I would agree with that.
And I think that the filter fills that role quite nicely once you switch to using a filter out there.
Yeah. I've got a couple of photographer friends who it drives them crazy to see photographers out shooting with the hood on backwards. And it's like, well, whatever. But there are times when it does kind of feel like it gets in the way. So, and if you if you put a filter on top of it, you put the case filters on top of it, then you're not going to be able to get that sucker off, and it just gets in the way. So, I said, all my lenses have lens hoods on them right now because I'm not shooting with them. But all right. Where is it? I saw no.
Oh, it's interesting. I saw Rob Hogarth ask about the Laowa 10 millimeter, the zero diffusion lens that they're pumping for Milky Way and architecture and stuff. It does look amazing, but it's a similar story to the Fuji X100. I mean, I ordered that months and months ago, the day it launched, and I haven't heard peep except that your back order is still in process. And I talked to the Viltrox or the Laowa people, and they say they don't have any samples to send out either to review. So it's one of those where I don't know what's going on with their production, but good luck getting a hold of one to even test. So
yeah. Guy asked about the difference in sharpening between the three present sliders: texture, clarity, and dehaze, and then detail sharpening. And in workshops, I am known to say you'll get kicked out if you use dehaze in any of the images you submit to me. But I am partially joking. But I feel as though those three sliders, clarity, texture, and dehaze, are they're interesting sliders. I used to use them all. I go back and look at old images, and I see that I've got clarity on every friggin' one. Clarity works to. I mean, it's a contrast adjustment, and it affects the midtones. And because it affects the middle tones in your images, a lot of times what happens is a lot of it really starts to make your image look crunchy. in a not a good way, right? Because it's not evenly sharpening everything. Texture is like a lighter version of the detail sharpening, in that it's just affecting only the details, the edges in your images. Dehaze looks at low contrast and increases it or decreases it. And again, it's another thing that in principle, you've got a hazy sky, or hazy mountains, and you want to dehaze them, and you add the dehaze. And what happens is it's basically just adjusting the contrast. And when you adjust the contrast, you're also adjusting saturation, color. I mean, it's one of the reasons why it's like I tell people there are other ways to work on contrast, low contrast, and sometimes you can't fix a low contrast image in the way that you want it to be. You want it to be clear. So that's kind of rough. I mean, I at this point in my world, I rarely touch anything other than texture, and even then, I mean, I can't remember the last time I used the texture. I do spend a lot of time in the detail sharpening pane, and that's where you get to focus on, those three sliders in detail. The amount, the radius, the I can't remember what that third one is. Density? Is it density? Detail, and then masking. And it's like the masking is the one that I use most. I mean, I will adjust the sharpening at 100% with the Alt key or the Option key held down so that I can see it in black and white. That gives you a better indication of how you're sharpening things. I'll use the radius slider, same thing. I'll hold down the Alt or Option key, and then it gives you this sort of weird little image. It's a gray background, but it shows you the edges in your image, and you can go up or down. The defaults are at 1 pixel as a pixels, is the amount. I actually find that I end up using less than 1 pixel, 0.8, 0.9. I tend not to touch the detail slider at all. It's in the it ranges. It's a unsharp mask versus a smart sharpen. It's almost a relic at this point. I've rarely
it's like
found
halo suppression versus micro sharpening kind of.
Right, exactly. And I leave it at about 30, and I rarely touch it because I can't find that working with the amount and the radius and then the masking really sort of helped me narrow in where I want to be on sharpening,
There's a little example of everything Rick's talking about in that video I did really recently with the Japanese maple as the cover, that was about working on your old images with new software. I go through basically what Rick's talking about, and there you can find it in the little scroll along the bottom. You'll see sharpening and noise reduction, because it's a good example of that.
Yeah. The masking slider is the one that I use all the time because the black means the detail amounts are not going to touch those pixels at all. White means they do. And this is another reason I'll give us a shout out for printing. Where I think you learn the most about how sharpening should work and all that sort of stuff is when you print, because you realize sort of, if all you're doing is working towards screen-based images, you're going to show them if you show them on Facebook, they're going to get whomped on anyway by Facebook's stuff. But if you're using Lightroom or whatever, you can over sharpen a bit because it's fine, but over sharpening really shows up when you print. Using the masking slider for detail is really the key that you want. It's like that you'll go to print something and you don't touch masking, but you'd sharpened an image, the detail looks great, but then your clouds don't look so good because all of those pixels have been sharpened, or the sky's been sharpened, And then if you had a noisy image,
you didn't notice.
if you had a noisy image, which there's this feeling that if you have a noisy image like at 1600 ISO, that somehow it's going to look crappy when you print, and it's not true. It's not true at all. But if you sharpen a noisy image and don't use the masking slider when you go to print it, you'll be like, what's going on in my sky? So
Well, and I feel that as you use those tools in conjunction with a little bit of manual noise reduction, you use that masking slider, it becomes like an analytic tool. You hold down the option or
yeah,
the Alt key, and you see that black and white mask laying. I go, oh, there's quite a bit of noise. And then you just pull the noise slider just a little bit and then look at the masking slider again and back and forth a little bit. You can kind of tune where's your sharpening going and how am I not sharpening noise and still sharpening the details that matter to me. You know, the more you do it, that masking slider Rick keeps talking about is like it shows you what's happening. It's the visual aid.
yeah. On a side note, one of the things that we've been hearing from mostly in the workshop, but I get emails from people who aren't in workshops as well, is sort of people would like editing help. And Hudson and I are actually looking into a sort of basic editing course for Lightroom for the way we edit. You know, when on the first day of a workshop, when we talk about editing, sorry, one of the things that we'll talk about is the fact of how our editing has changed over the years. Some of that is as we've gotten more comfortable with our cameras and understand what they're capable of in different situations, we're getting a more well-balanced image for the scene that we're shooting. But the other thing is that, you know, the editing tools have gotten so much more amazing. Mm-hmm. And they actually have caused us to we edit less than we did before. And it's interesting when we do like little editing sessions and workshops about, you know, how, you know, people love to use presets and, you know, nothing against presets, but, you know, it's like every image really is different. And you really do need to think about how you want to represent your photograph or your photographs. And, you know, so we're looking at doing some stuff for it. And we're actually talking about doing an editing workshop in Portland, similar to the concept that we do for the printing workshops, but we won't do that next year. So, Babette, have you done a sharpening video for On One? I think you have.
I can just stop doing what I was typing. Yeah, I have. I actually did a video recently on how I like to use the no noise AI and how incredible it is. You know, I think if you jump back in the Plus video library and take a look through some of my editing videos, I mean, I can't tell you specifically which one, but in many of my editing videos, if you scrub through, I get down and talk about it's the same. It's actually the same. I don't think that their masking slider is quite as good as Adobe's masking slider, especially at the lower end of its threshold. It sort of gets noisy, but the minute you start pulling it a little bit to the right, it does the same thing. It enables you to have a look at the sharpening mask that you've created, and the controls are generally identical in their manual sharpening and noise reduction. And the other thing that's nice with On One with no noise is that, you know, they have that algorithm where it kind of does its demosaicing with an eye towards preserving detail and reducing noise on the original raw file that you're working on without creating a new file the way that Lightroom or DxO or Topaz would do, and it underlays everything that you're working on, and then they still will give you the sliders to do a little bit more tuning. And so, you know, I often in a really noisy image will use no noise AI and On One. I think it's a really nice implementation. And then they have a similar set of sliders to Lightroom and Photoshop. I mean, it's essentially the same as Lightroom.
Yeah.
Just that the masking slider is not quite as nuanced and clear a view of what's happening. It still works, but it's a little cruder.
Yeah. And the one last thing, sorry. You know, when you're sharpening, when you're applying clarity, when you're working in curves, I mean, all of those types of areas where you can do a lot of, I'd say damage, but you can do a lot of adjustment to parts of your image. Work at 100%. Okay,
Oh yeah.
get your screen so that you're viewing an image at 100%. Sometimes actually, when I'm sharpening, I go up to 200% just because I really want to see what's going on. But 100% for noise reduction, 100% for sharpening, 100% for clarity and texture.
I think if you have a smaller 4K monitor, and by smaller I mean less than 30 inches, I think 200% is a good idea when you're sharpening.
Yeah, yeah.
The 4K monitors really condense. You know, it's like in the old days when we had 1080 monitors, 100% was huge. Now it's not so big.
Okay.
Oh, and Guy just had a little follow up, but he asked that question, and I think that that you're exactly right. Move those ranges around. You know, just like any editing, as you're kind of figuring out what these sliders do, make big drastic changes in them to see what happens to your image, and then back off and watch that masking slider. You know, do your big change and then hold down the masking and take a look at what happened with the mask, and then go back and change it, and then take a look at the mask. That masking slider really is your window to what's happening.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we have wasted an hour of everybody's time. It's time to send you on your way.
I got to take some kids to the dentist.
I will say one thing. So the next office hours will be August 6th, and we're talking culling, portfolio building, all of that sort of stuff. But there'll be a lot of discussion. I mean, we're based in Lightroom, of course. We'll be talking about that, but a lot of the things that we talk about will be applicable for On1. You know, it's basically just, you know, you built this library of 80,000, 100,000 images, and how do you get through them? You know, and how do you deal with old images? How do you deal with, you know, when you go out now and shoot and come back with 1,000 images on your Z9 when you're out shooting birds? You know, and how do you sort of cull through that quickly? You know, we'll talk about those types of things. And so if you've got questions specifically about that, but Hudson and I have been spending a lot of time sort of looking at old work, and you know, it's a good process to go through. And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand is that, as is the case with On1, with Adobe, with even if you use Apple's product or Capture One, the raw engines for editing our images have gotten so much more refined and so much better than the tools we had back in 2006 and 2010 and 2015. And, you know, this thing where Hudson talked about, you know, going back to edit old images, I've been doing that for years. You know, it's like going through your old work is a really good impetus for how to deal with your work today, as well as to how to find some images that are actually hidden gems. So we'll talk a lot about that sort of stuff with the next one. So,
indeed.
All right. Well, take care, everybody.
All right, guys. Thanks, everybody. Oh, what? Bye, everybody.